All right, good morning. Sorry we're off to a bit of a slow start, but somebody decided to have a fire drill this time of day. Better before class than during class, right? All right. So today's the 17th. Today we're going to finish up just a little bit of culture, and then we'll really be caught up with where we're supposed to be, or where the schedule says we are. We'll be talking about socialization today, and likely be talking about social interaction on Friday, which sets us up, So that means we have lecture all of this week, all of next week, and then our next exam is the 29th. So 2 more full weeks of lecture, including Monday that we just passed. Any questions about the schedule? Okay, so that means everybody here has read chapters 3 and 4, correct? And they have notes with them right now. So I'd rather have you more talking today and me doing the less of the talking. And really, that's the format we should be using for the rest of the semester. All right, so chapter 3, we were really close to the end. And we were talking about postmodernism. We could use a map. Here it is. Shouldn't be. Here we go. So we have gotten all the way through to both postcards and media. We talked about cultural universals, we talked about language, and we talked about the linguistic relativity hypothesis. Who'd like to remind us what that hypothesis says and what we saw in the video? Yes? Yes? Okay, the way that our language is constructed. And there was a focus by Keith Chen on the future versus futurist nature of certain languages. Right? And what was his conclusion in studying future versus futurist languages? Yes, what is one? Well, his research concluded that not only socially do people make different decisions, but economically people make different decisions, right? Everybody remember that? Okay. Any questions about the video? Okay. So, as I mentioned, there's only one postmodernist that we're really going to talk about this semester. And that was John Baudrillard and his theory of hyperreality. So this fits in well with the time period of the popularity of postmodernism. And he says that the influence of television, particularly television, but also the mass media, so we got up to this. And then I just didn't give you, we didn't have time for the different simulations. So this is where we left off. So that when we're exposed over time to mass media messages, but he was talking about television in particular, people's sense of reality becomes so distorted they can't distinguish between their own experience and what the media is telling them, television is telling them. So we'll go through that. Any questions? Yeah, this is precisely where we left off. All right? So, he says this happens in a series of stages, what he calls the stages simulations. He said the first order simulation, or the first stage, is very simple. You're exposed to television, you're exposed to the mass media, and it creates a visible link between the representation that you see on television or the media and the real that you experience. And he refers to that as art imitating life. So you're not fooled. You know the difference between your own experience and what you see on television, but there's now the beginnings of a relationship, a link. Probably not. Anyway, never mind. Okay, go. He said over time, as we continue to be exposed to mass media messages, and you could think of it today as the internet, social media, all the things that you're exposed to. Just think about how many things you're going to be exposed to today during the time you're walking around the campus. He said, over time, our perceptions of reality become blurred. He gives the analogy of a map or a painting. As two people become so detailed that they have a difficult time telling the difference. So in the first stage, you go to an art museum, you see the Mona Lisa, you know that it's not really a woman on the wall, you know it represents a woman's face. Over time, things become so detailed that it's very hard to tell the difference, but you're not quite fooled yet, it's just blurry. And boy, what would Baudrillard have said about artificial intelligence? The fact that you can change pictures to make it look like what you want, and videos to make it look like what you want. And then, ultimately, he said we enter into the third order simulation, or the third stage. So I mentioned the third stage, or the third order simulation, or any of these on the exams. Simulation and stage are really the same thing. He says now we can no longer tell the difference between the representation in the media, on television, and the real, meaning our own experience. What do you think about that? It's a theory, of course. You think that's how many people's realities form? Yes? Everyone's exposed to this. And he said, because of the changes in the access or the impact of mass media. And again, you really have to think about it. Prior to the 1980s, people's exposure to mass media was when they turned on the 5 o'clock news, when they turned on the 10 o'clock news, when they chose to watch a sitcom or something like that. It never reached out to them, right? But that's really changed since then. From 24 hours television, people just would always have the television on because there was always something on. In most American households prior to that, there was nothing on at certain times of the day. There was no point to it. The radio was always on, but that didn't have as much of an impact. Actually, I'm not even sure. But anyway. Depending on the amount of exposure, sure. I mean, if you're a cop, and you're always outside, and you're probably not going to be exposed to as much as someone who's sitting at home watching this. Sure, it's going to have different levels of impact. Yeah.
So consider things like AI to be a simulation of
I think, again, I'm going to answer as a postmodernist in this case, right? Not but yeah, postmodernists would say, I told you so. This is exactly what they would say, right? Because there's no question, and I'll say this, there's no question that AI is creating distorting reality. Whether it's just for fun, when you and I were just making fun videos of our friends, sent to our buddies, and hey, look, I made you, fall on the floor. That's fine. But other people are really going to be much more severely impacted, especially around election time and all those things. So yeah, absolutely. No, No, this is exactly what Baudrillard would have, I don't even think he could have predicted this, but this is what he would have said, absolutely. And it's going to get more intense, right? The stuff we're playing around with AI is just the tip of the iceberg. The stuff that's really serious, we don't have access to. And that's not a skeptical thing to say. There's a lot of, you may have noticed this, there's a lot of guardrails when you play around with AI, right? If you want to do something that's a little off, a little off, it'll say, you violated our guidelines, and it won't do it, right? But the ones that companies have and the government has, they don't have any guidelines. They can do whatever they want. So it's going to get, it's going to be even more distorted. Any questions other than that? You think it's true? Forget about AI for a second, because we're just getting into the beginnings of this. But what about your friends, right? What about your friends? Do you think most of what they believe is true is based upon what they are exposed to in the mass media, or your family, or? You? Yes? You want to say something? Not really? Okay. Anybody? Yes?
Especially like social media within my age group, I feel like media kind of convinces everyone that this is a fake news. So like someone will give an opinion and they'll seem like they know their opinion and knowledgeable about it, and then everyone will kind of like follow it like a trend. I feel like trends have changed people's opinions a lot. And like they won't go based on what they're doing with their whole life, they'll go off of like whatever happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
So there's like algorithms in social media, so you're only seeing what you want to see. So
Or what they want you to see.
What would appeal to you is
Yeah.
what they're giving you, so you're only really seeing one side of the story.
Good. Anybody else? Yeah, so something like this happened on this campus, and not to get controversial or anything like that, but just to give you an example. You guys weren't here, so it's maybe just before COVID, right? So there was an incident on a bus. You guys all heard about this? A couple of the students were in my class, actually. There was an incident on a bus late at night on a Friday, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. A bit of a fight broke out, and 3 female students called 911 and said they had been attacked. You guys hear about that? They had been attacked, racial thing, there was a lot of stuff. A lot of people jumped on that bandwagon, including Hillary Clinton, by the way, who had no idea what was going on, but she thought it was good for her. She put something out on Twitter saying, yeah, this should never happen. There were vigils on campus. The prior president had a lot to say about it. And it turned out that everybody was just responding to what they heard in the social media. Well, there were 24 cameras on that bus, and it turned out that it was the 3 female students who were the aggressors, who were physically assaulting other people, and it all came out as clear as day on video. They were expelled from the school. Some of them had criminal charges against them. There was no question, ultimately, what happened. It was on video. It was clear as day. But the president jumped on it because of what they heard in social media. Hillary Clinton jumped on it. I can say this because it's public information. One of the students' brothers had played for the Buffalo Bills at the time, and he said he was coming down to take care of business for these people that had touched his sister, which she was the one who you could see on the video. You can look this up. They were beating the heck out of these guys. Anyway, it was all, the reality on this campus for about a week was that this had happened. This was real until the video came out, and then it wasn't real. And all these people were going, oh, but I heard it on social media. How come it's not real? And a lot of people lost their places in school and their jobs, and don't get who it was, but you can kind of figure it out. And that was the reality here for a while. And it wasn't true at all. And that's an example of hyperreality. Any questions? Okay. So that's chapter 3. Let's now catch up and we are talking about chapter 4. This is a very different chapter. This is very different than what we've been talking about, but very similar in some ways to chapter 5. So the more you understand this chapter, the easier it will be to understand the subsequent chapter on social interaction, because they are related. In many, like many textbooks in sociology, they actually put chapters, this and the next chapter, next topic, together into one chapter, but we look at it separately. So who'd like to tell us what socialization means? By the way, just to finish the thought, somewhat lighter note, one of the female students on that situation who was in my class, she emails me and she says, I can't make it to our next exam. And I'll tell you the name. And I said, well, why not? She goes, well, I had a concussion from an incident on the bus. She said she had, so she not only knew all this, she lied to get out of an exam on top of that. But she was out of school. All right. So what is socialization? If you want me to read it. Yes.
The process when like children start to form like norms and rules and like how they're supposed to act.
Okay, so it's the process by which, and it's a lifelong process, it's very important, that's why I highlighted it, which people acquire and internalize norms and values and language and develop a sense of self. So when we see sense, yes?
Is this related to the social
Social learning theory, I believe, yeah. Who would like to remind us what norms and values are? Oh, actually, before we get there. When you see sense of self, that term sense of self, even if you didn't do any more reading than just this, what sociological perspective is the only one that addresses the phrase sense of self? It not addresses the phrase, that's not put wrong. It is interested in some person's sense of self. Why do you say that? Yep, exactly. That's how quickly you should be able to live. Sense of self, symbolic direction. Norms and values are usually associated with symbolic direction. Who would like to tell us again the difference between the norm and the value? Yeah, go ahead. Okay? So a norm is the appropriate behavior relative to the social setting. Right? In your dorm room, you can text all you want. Right? That's fine. I have no interest in what you're doing in your dorm room. But here it's different. Right? It's a different social setting. Why you text, or that you in fact even have to be told, is about value, right? It's the right thing or the wrong thing. That's the difference between norms and values. Norms are the appropriate behavior relative to the social setting. Values are the abstract ideas of right and wrong. So, it's a lifelong process, and that's very important when we move forward. It's the process by which people learn to function as a member of society. It's the assumption that we all start out as a blank slate without really any of this taking place naturally. There has to be learning, social learning. So, I'll let you catch up and show me your notes. By the way, while people were still writing, a couple of things that I wanted to mention before, not a big deal. There were still people who put some blank, who left blank answers on their first exam. Right. Despite my reminders, it's only, hurting you. So please, in the future, make sure that if there are 40 questions, you put down 40 answers, or 50 questions, you put down 50 answers, or whatever it is. It wasn't a big number, fortunately, and I do appreciate everybody being on time. That was another thing that went well with the exam. The other thing is there were a couple people that I eventually found their exam. Yeah, I think the reason was because in one case it was that I skipped it and now it's posted, but a couple of you, I think you put your scan sheets inside the exam sheets and put them down. The first exam you didn't realize. And then when I would go through the scan sheets, I don't see them. And then I had to go back and find them. So just make sure you put the scan sheets in one pile, the exam sheets in another pile with your name on it. Because that's always important too. If I can't find your scan sheet, then I'm going to look for your exam sheet to make sure you're actually here, right? But the chances of that happening are very small. You put it down on the table, I put it in my bag, and then it never gets lost. It's always misplaced. So a couple of you did tell me you didn't see your grades. They're all posted down, and those are just minor things. But don't leave any blank answers. It makes me feel bad because while it probably won't affect anybody's grade that much, it's just a waste of 2 or 4 or 6 points. Okay. So the process of socialization has been taking place for many, many, many generations, since really the beginning of families. And this process, this generational process, is called social reproduction. So it's the generational or reproduced socialization process that is passed down. Because if it only took place once, that would only affect one set of people. It happens all the time. And you may not even realize, right? You've clearly been socialized by your family or others around you. And whether you're thinking about having children anytime soon or it's not even something you're thinking about, you are internalizing norms and values that you will likely pass down to your children, whether it's anytime soon or sometime distantly in the future. But you're internalizing that. What are your values? How is that changing over time? These 4 years become a very important period of time for people either reinforcing values that they've already had or reconsidering them, right? From what they brought up. So it's a very important time that you're internalizing these things and the norms change, and these are things that you are almost certainly going to pass down through social reproduction. Social roles and social values become very important in this course. But in particular, social roles are the expectations of the statuses that we have in society, or the positions that we have in society. Our positions or our statuses are very similar to our subcultures. If you remember our discussion of subcultures. So I don't know anything about most of you except that you're students. Right? That's your subculture, and that's also your social status while you're here, or while you're in school. But the roles are the expectations of those statuses or positions. Excuse me. So what are the expectations of being a college student? What do people expect of you? Yeah. That's always nice. That's like the first level kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's always nice too. Okay. Yeah, that there's a point to all this, right? I mean, I have adult students, or older students, they want to audit classes, they have intellectual curiosity, they just want to learn some things and, talk to people about issues that are interesting. But most students want to think, right? Not always the case, but most often, right? There's some objective to it. Because this is a lot of work. And the truth is, you all could have gone out and gotten a job out of high school, and you're deferring some of that money by not going directly to a job. So it's an investment, right? So there should be some objective to it, right? Okay. What other expectations do people have of college students? Yeah.
To learn to live for the
Yeah, that not only is there an objective to graduate, but there's an objective to be able to use that information and that knowledge to contribute to society. You know, from a structural functionalist perspective, that's what it's all about, right? So that there are generations of people that can fly the planes, that can help people when they're sick, that can teach people, you know, that they can replace the people that are no longer doing that. Yeah, that's very important too. Okay. So we're going to talk about two different models of child development. And I want to be very clear about something. So please pay attention particularly to this. While we are talking for this period of time, these two models, about child development, the early stages of socialization, do not confuse that with the fact that socialization itself is a lifelong process. We're focusing right now on the early stages of it, primary socialization. That doesn't mean that it stops at any particular point. But we're just focusing on two well-known theories and models. Okay? Because I'll ask a question about that, and they'll go, well, we were talking about Reed and Piaget. I thought we're only going to be, socialization was only about childhood. No. All right, so George Herbert Mead, again, if you've taken psychology, you'll recognize his name. He's a symbolic interactionist. And he believed, well, let me ask you, what was the central focus? What was the most important thing that he believed was critical for regular and normal child development? Something had to happen. There had to be something. I'll wait. I'm here till 1 o'clock today. What did he say was very important in order for this to take place normally? Yes?
children educating.
Well, you're talking about a state, so you're on the right track. Okay. But what has to happen for somebody to imitate somebody? There has to be
Model.
close. There has to be regular social interaction. Regular social interaction. You can't imitate somebody. You can't take on their role unless you interact with them regularly, according to me. Piaget didn't believe that. And we'll talk about that later. He didn't think that was so important. But to me, it was the central focus of this model. That. Sorry, go back. And I'll show you a picture. I'm not sure if it's still in the textbook or not, but I'll put it up on the screen. You can see it fine. We'll talk about what this would look like. Regular social interaction. Doesn't mean once in a blue moon, it means regular. So, who has heard of the story of Jeannie? Usually you hear about this in high school. Who has heard about the story of Jeannie? Anybody have heard that? You have. What do you know about that?
She was like isolated for like a really long period
13
of time.
years, yeah.
And then she had to like readjust to society and like learn a language and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Young girl was seemingly developmentally challenged, and her parents, in their perverse attempt to protect her from society, locked her in a room for 13 years, handcuffed to a potty chair, with almost no interaction whatsoever. They fed her, they cleaned the potty, and they took away the tray, you know. But as far as everything I've read and everything I've seen, because there's a pretty good documentary about it, she had almost no regular interaction. And finally, at 13 years old, somebody found out about it, called the police, they rescued her, and then for the period of time, as you said, a team of psychologists and psychiatrists attempted to re-socialize her. And they found it almost impossible. She had missed too many of what Mead would refer to as important milestones, the stages. They were able to teach her like 2,000 words, but she had no ability to put them into a sentence. So if you held up a pen, she could say pen. If you held up a cup, she could say cup. But if you asked her, what do you do with the cup, Jeannie, she couldn't say, you drink from the cup, you write with the pen. She couldn't put that together. And that's where Mead believed the regular social interaction that was missed was critical in her. Now, he didn't talk about her directly, but people in that situation. They're often referred to as feral children. I think the book talks about them as feral children. These children that are brought up without any really guidelines or out in the wild and things like that. So it's not just one example. But this is what Mead was kind of talking about, right? So he defines the self, and again, we're talking about the self in the symbolic interaction sense of the self, the social psychology, because he was a social psychologist sense. And it then defines the development of self through reflexivity, the ability to put ourselves in the social role of others and act as they act. So we know what a role is now. It's the expectation of the status. He believed that the only way to put ourselves in the role of others is through regular social interaction. Any questions? But again, this is what we do. So he talks about a couple of stages. PHA is going to talk about stages as well. There are 3 stages that we're going to go over in detail. Everybody is clear that sense of self is associated with symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is associated with social psychology. Right? All those things that we talked about before. They didn't have this when I was a student. This would be pretty cool. All right? Again, if you miss anything, you can either come down or it's posted in your textbook. So he argues the child's sense of self emerges in 3 stages. Somebody like to tell us what the first stage is? Yeah, no, that's a good example, right? So like desensitization to violence. So cartoons that you probably can't see regularly now, like the Roadrunner, Coyote was constantly getting killed and smashed and anvils falling on him and all that stuff. The kids probably thought, well, probably a kid like this thought, fall off the cliff, just get back up again, right? And that's part of the reason why those kinds of things were phased out. But yeah, sure. I'm sure, without knowing for a fact, plenty of kids who hurt themselves thinking that was just the reality. You could just jump off the cliff and you do it again 5 minutes later, right? Yeah. All right, so the first stage, since no one's volunteering, is the preparatory stage, somewhere between birth and 3 years old. I think specifically talks about normally through the first year, but he provides a range of birth and 3 years old. So, somebody like to tell us what happens in the preparatory stage? Yes?
Isn't that when you like counseling and maybe the parent is driving?
Well, he talks about a certain takeaway, and I think you may have even mentioned it, or somebody mentioned it already. So that imitation is the main milestone. Remember we talked about Jeannie missing certain milestones? So the first milestone is in the preparatory stage, and that is the simple act of imitation. How, we believe there's no way you can imitate somebody unless you have regular social interaction with them. Right? How could you? I mean, obviously, even then you're interacting with TV. Or whatever you use now. TVs are good. A lot of people just don't even have a TV anymore, right? You guys, when you're going, you have TVs, or you see everybody just watches their computers, right? You have TVs? You watch. But I mean, does everyone have a TV? Yeah, you don't need it anymore, right? It's interesting. I never thought about it, actually. I guess I wouldn't need one anyway. Simple act, generally in the first year, but he goes up to the third year, if it's normal, and engages in meaningless imitation. There's no strategy to it, right? There's nothing strategic to it. You see somebody do something and you imitate it. But you can't do that without regular social interaction, according to you. No symbolic understanding, not necessary at this point. And again, I'll show you a picture in a minute that will help, I think, clarify this. If you're not already familiar. I don't remember if they still have this picture in the book or they're taking it out. Okay? Second stage, the play stage, somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. Play means something different than preparatory, right? Play means that there are certain expectations, right? We're going to play, I'm going to throw you the ball, and you're going to throw it. There's some turn taking involved. There's some general guidelines to what we're doing. And that's a little different than before. And now we get to some slightly more complex things. Mead talks about children taking on the role of the other. If you did the reading, you know there's actually 2 types of other that he's referring to. Who could tell us one or both of the types of other that he's referring to? So much more easier would be if you read this in advance and you go, what does he mean? What do you self and other? It's easier when you do that. What type of other is he referring to? Either one for now. Yes. Well, so there's a term, something other and something other. Parents are part of that, yes. Kids are part of that. What would parents, so let's just think about that. What type of other would parents generally assume if they're involved in the child? Right, what kind of other? You use the term something other and something other. Blank other and blank other. What would parents be in? Anybody remember? Yes. Can't hear you. Right, but I'm looking for a term that was used by me. Yes, they would be role. Just to answer your question. Anybody? Something other that the parents would be classified. Or your grandparents, or your siblings if they have a lot of contact with you. Significant others is the first one, right. So, we'll get to that term in a minute. So the child plays one role at a time. So there, significant others are important agents of socialization. That's an incredibly important term in this chapter. And in the course. So early on, they've accomplished, assuming that they've accomplished imitation in the preparatory stage, Mead believed, again, it's always, what is that whistling? Is somebody doing that, or just the voices in my head? No, just. Did you worry about another one of my tasks? That would be a different context. But anyway. Regular social interaction doesn't stop. He believes that you get through stage one through regular social interaction. You have to have regular social interaction to get through stage 2, play stage. Significant others are the people that have the most contact with us, that are most important in our lives. And the term agents of socialization is something that you should have read about quite a bit in this chapter. And there's the picture I was talking about. Is this still in the textbook, or they took it out? That's assuming you looked at the chapter. That should be a strict question in the exam. Was there a picture? Yeah, there you go. 50% of you get a point. What's going on in this picture? Which child is in which stage so far? Yeah, we have to. The older boy here? Do you think he's in the play stage? You think he's somewhere between 3 and 5? Looks about that, right? What is he doing? Well, he's interacting with his father, right? So it seems like there's regular social interaction. And he's taking you on the role. He's learning the expectations of being out in the backyard or in the garden or whatever you call it, right? Yeah. Which first stage role? Yeah, why do you think this kid is in the first stage? He's just watching, right? Yeah. He's interacting, but he's just imitating. He's not actually doing anything. He doesn't seem to understand what the heck you do with a wheelbarrow, but his brother seems to be learning what you do with a wheelbarrow. So you can almost see right there the differences between the preparatory stage and the play stage. Is that clear to everybody? Right? Same activity, but in the case of the younger child, it seems like all he needs to do is watch and imitate. Move the barrel around the way he'd be watching somebody else, even though he had probably no idea what it accomplished. And that's fine, according to me. Okay, any questions about the play stage? We have 6 minutes. No, we go to 25, right? Yeah. All right. The third stage in Mead's model, and again, this is only in Mead's model, doesn't mean that socialization ends at 9 years old. That's not, that would be a mistake to think that. Is the game stage. Games are different than play. How is a game different than just play? Yeah. Games have rules, and you keep scoring games, right? Generally speaking, you and I have a catch, we have fun. We just play, right? You and I race on the track, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, right? That's kind of the difference. There's some rules, there's some, you keep score, and ultimately there's some kind of victory, right, involved. There's some objective to it. So now between 6 and 9 years old, we get it's a little more complex stuff, right? This will probably take us through the rest of the class. So, me distinguishes between the me and the I, which obviously sounds very similar. The me and the I. The me is the social self. The I is the unsocialized infant. The I is the immediate and unthinking response. It is also the basis of individual. We hold on to our I. However, the me is the phase of self that sees focuses on the perspective of community values and expectations. What that means is It's where you fit, you understand that you fit into the community, your family, society, as opposed to your knee-jerk reaction to certain stimuli. So a child is in a room, parents hear something break, they rush into the room, and what does the child say when they're this age? I didn't do it. That's the immediate and unthinking response. I don't want to be held responsible for this. I didn't do it. But if you say to that same child, are you the oldest? Are you the youngest? And they'll say, oh, who's the oldest? If you say to the child, who's the youngest? They'll say, me. Assuming they're the youngest, right? That's a different way of thinking about yourself. One is where you fit into the family, the community, or to the society. One is the immediate and unthinking response. But it's still about that person. Any questions so far? 3 minutes. Question. Let's do a little bit more. So, infants only know the eye, naturally, inherently, but through regular, you can write in here, regular social interaction. They learn about the me and the other. There's another other. Not the significant other. Does anybody know what the other is? We have an exam before yeah, it's usually a little harder than you see every period. So. Yes? Again, it's a term something other. I appreciate the examples, but I'm thinking of a certain phrase that, remember we said significant others are parents, people that influence you most often, and what's significant? Well, I didn't say it. What is the other kind of other? If somebody gets it, I'll let you out of here right now. There you go, generalized other. That's what we'll pick up on Friday. It's complex, so we'll spend some time on it. Make sure you read chapter 4, and I would suggest going on to 5.